The metallic clink of Catherine Everett's last silver dollar hitting the poker table echoed through the smoke-filled saloon like a death knell, and every man in that room knew she was either the bravest woman in Centralia, Washington Territory, or the most desperate. It was March of 1883, and the rain hammered against the windows of the Silver Spur Saloon with the same relentless fury that had defined Catherine's life for the past 6 months. She sat rigid in her chair, her worn calico dress doing little to hide the swell of her belly, 7 months along and showing clear as day. The baby kicked hard against her ribs as if protesting this final gamble, but Catherine kept her face smooth as river stone. She had learned long ago that showing fear was the same as bleeding in shark-infested waters. Across the table sat 4 men, their faces ranging from curious to contemptuous. The dealer was a thin man named Silas who ran the game with practiced efficiency. To his left sat a grizzled prospector who smelled of whiskey and unwashed wool. To his right, a young railroad worker with dirt still under his fingernails. And directly across from Catherine sat Vincent Graham, a cowboy who had wandered into town 3 days prior with a string of horses and a reputation for being fair in his dealings. Vincent was perhaps 25 years old, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of creek water in summer, that peculiar mix of green and brown that seemed to change with the light. He wore his dark hair longer than was fashionable, curling slightly at his collar, and his hands as they held his cards were calloused but steady. Unlike the other men at the table, he had not laughed when Catherine sat down to play. He had simply nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement that felt oddly respectful. "You sure about this, miss?" Silas asked, his fingers hovering over the deck. "That is your last dollar, if I am hearing right." "I am sure," Catherine said, and her voice came out stronger than she felt. "Deal the cards." The prospector chuckled, a wet rattling sound. "What exactly you planning to bet with after that dollar is in the pot? That baby you are carrying." The words hung in the air like a slap. Catherine felt heat rise in her cheeks, but before she could respond, Vincent spoke. "Show some respect," he said quietly, but there was steel underneath the words. "The lady came to play cards, same as any of us. Either ante up or fold." The prospector grumbled but tossed his coins into the growing pile. The railroad worker did the same. Vincent added his bet with a fluid motion, his eyes never leaving Catherine's face. She could not read his expression, could not tell if he pitied her or respected her, or simply did not care one way or another. Silas dealt the cards with quick, practiced flips of his wrist. Catherine picked up her hand slowly, keeping her face neutral even as her heart began to pound. 3 queens stared back at her, along with a 7 and a deuce. It was a good hand, maybe good enough. Her fingers trembled slightly as she arranged the cards, and she saw Vincent notice, though he said nothing. The betting began in earnest. The prospector folded early, muttering about not wasting good money. The railroad worker stayed in for 2 rounds before shaking his head and throwing in his cards. That left only Catherine and Vincent, the pot growing between them like something alive and hungry. "I will see your dollar," Vincent said, "and raise you 20. Catherine's stomach dropped. She had nothing left, no money to match his bet. The baby kicked again, harder this time, as if trying to tell her something. Around them, the saloon had grown quiet. Even the piano player had stopped his endless tinkling to watch the drama unfold. "I do not have $20, Catherine said, and hated how small her voice sounded. Vincent studied her for a long moment. "What do you have?" Catherine swallowed hard. This was it, the moment that would either save her or destroy her completely. "I have nothing," she said. "Nothing but myself and this child I am carrying and the clothes on my back." Then maybe you should fold, Silas suggested, not unkindly, but Catherine shook her head. There has to be something I can put up, some kind of collateral. Like what? The railroad worker called out. You got property, horses, jewelry. I have my work, Catherine said desperately. I can cook and clean and mend, I can keep books and tend gardens. I worked as a seamstress before. She trailed off, not wanting to explain the husband who had died in a logging accident, the landlord who had evicted her when she could not pay rent, the slow, desperate slide into poverty that had brought her here, to this moment, betting her last dollar on a hand of cards. Vincent set his cards face down on the table. I've got a proposition, he said slowly. If you win, you take the pot, all of it, must be close to $200 there. And if you win? Catherine asked, though she was afraid of the answer. Vincent leaned back in his chair, and for the first time, something like a smile touched his mouth. If I win, you work for me. I just won 40 acres in a land grant up north of here, good grazing land with a creek running through it. I was planning to hire help anyway, someone to cook and keep house while I get the ranch established. You work for me for 1 year, room and board included. After that, you are free to go or stay as you see fit. The offer hung in the air between them. It was not what Catherine had expected. She had braced herself for something crude, some suggestion that would have sent her fleeing into the rain with whatever dignity she had left. But this was different. This was honest work, a roof over her head, food in her belly and her baby's belly. And the child, she asked. When the baby comes. You will have time to recover, Vincent said. I am not a monster. A woman needs time after birthing, everyone knows that. Catherine looked down at her cards again. 3 queens. It was a strong hand, but not unbeatable. She thought about the alternative, about the rain-soaked streets outside, about the boarding house that had evicted her that very morning, about the gnawing hunger that had been her constant companion for weeks now. All right, she said. I accept your terms. Silas looked between them. You both understand what you are agreeing to. This is binding, witnessed by everyone here. I understand, Catherine said. As do I, Vincent confirmed. Then show your cards. Catherine laid down her hand first, spreading the 3 queens across the table with the 7 and deuce beside them. A murmur ran through the watching crowd. It was a good hand, a winning hand more often than not. Vincent looked at the cards for a long moment, then slowly laid down his own hand. 4 tens, staring up from the green, felt like accusatory eyes. The saloon erupted in noise, men shouting and laughing and slapping Vincent on the back. Catherine sat very still, her hands folded in her lap, trying to process what had just happened. She had lost. After everything, after scraping together that last dollar from coins she had found in the street and doing washing for a nickel here and there, after pinning all her hopes on this one desperate gamble, she had lost. But she had not lost everything. She had lost herself into a year of work, yes, but work that came with shelter and food and safety. It was more than she had possessed when she walked into the saloon an hour ago. It was, in its own strange way, a kind of winning. Vincent collected his winnings with efficient movements, dividing the pot into neat stacks. Then he pushed one stack, perhaps $50 worth, across the table to Catherine. "What is this?" she asked, confused. "Your dollar," he said. "You bet it. You should have something to show for your courage. Consider it an advance on your wages." Catherine stared at the money, then at Vincent. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were kind. Around them, the noise of the saloon was returning to normal, the piano player striking up a cheerful tune, men returning to their drinks and their own games. "I do not need charity," Catherine said, but her hand was already reaching for the coins. "It is not charity," Vincent replied. "It is good business. I need help getting that ranch started, and you need a place to land. We both got what we needed tonight." He stood, pocketing the rest of his winnings, and gestured toward the door. "I've got a room at the boarding house on 3rd Street. Meet me there at dawn tomorrow, and we will head out to the property. It is about a half-day's ride by wagon, but the roads are decent even in this rain." "Wait," Catherine said, rising awkwardly to her feet, one hand supporting her belly. "I do not even know you." "How do I know you are a man of your word?" Vincent paused, considering the question. Then he reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This is the deed to the land," he said, showing her the official-looking document with its stamps and signatures. "Vincent Graham, that is my name, and I have got nothing to hide. Ask anyone in town who has dealt with me these past few days. I pay what I owe, and I keep my promises." He handed her the deed to examine. Catherine unfolded it with careful fingers, reading the legal language that described 40 acres of land along the Skookumchuck River, granted to Vincent Graham by the territorial government as payment for services rendered as a scout and guide. It looked legitimate, though Catherine was no expert in such things. "I will be there," she said finally, handing back the deed. "At dawn." Vincent nodded once, then turned and walked out into the rain, his boots making hollow sounds on the wooden floor. Catherine watched him go, one hand pressed against her belly where the baby was finally settling down, as if it too had been waiting to see how the cards would fall. She spent that night in a corner of the saloon, curled up on a bench with her shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. Silas had taken pity on her and let her stay after the game broke up, saying only that she should be gone before the morning crowd arrived. Catherine dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every sound, one hand always on the small purse where she had tucked the $50 Vincent had given her. It was more money than she had seen in months, and the weight of it felt both reassuring and terrifying. As the first gray light began to filter through the saloon windows, Catherine rose stiffly and made her way to the washroom to clean up as best she could. Her dress was wrinkled and stained, her hair a tangled mess, but she did what she could with cold water and a sliver of soap. Looking at herself in the cracked mirror, she saw a woman who looked older than her 22 years, worn down by loss and struggle, but her eyes were clear and determined. She had survived this long, and she would survive whatever came next. The rain had finally stopped when she stepped outside, leaving the streets muddy and slick. Catherine picked her way carefully toward 3rd Street, trying to keep her skirts out of the worst of the muck. Centralia was a new town, barely 10 years old, built up around the railroad and the logging industry. The buildings were mostly raw lumber, unpainted and practical, though here and there someone had made an effort at decoration, a painted sign or a window box of flowers. The boarding house was a 2-story structure with a wide porch and relatively clean windows. Catherine climbed the steps carefully, her hand on the railing for support, and knocked on the door. A woman in her 50s answered, her hair tucked under a neat cap, her apron spotless despite the early hour. "I am looking for Vincent Graham," Catherine said. "He told me to meet him here at dawn." The woman looked her up and down, taking in the worn dress and the obvious pregnancy, and her expression softened. "He is out back, loading the wagon. You must be the cook he hired." Catherine nodded, relieved that Vincent had apparently told people she was coming. It made it all feel more real, more legitimate. The woman stepped aside and gestured through the house. "Go on through. Can I get you some breakfast before you go? You look like you could use a hot meal." "I do not have money to pay for it," Catherine admitted. "Did not ask if you did," the woman said briskly. "Sit yourself down at that table there, and I will bring you something. A woman in your condition should not be traveling on an empty stomach." Catherine wanted to protest, wanted to maintain her pride, but the smell of frying bacon and fresh bread was making her head swim with hunger. She sat at the small kitchen table and let the boarding house keeper fuss over her, bringing plate after plate of food, eggs and bacon and biscuits with butter and jam, and a cup of milk still warm from the cow. "Thank you," Catherine said around mouthfuls of food, trying not to eat too quickly, trying to maintain some semblance of manners. "You are very kind." "Everyone needs a hand up now and then," the woman said. "That man you are going with, he is a good one. Paid his bill in full and gave me extra for the trouble of his horse. You could do worse than working for him." Catherine finished her meal just as Vincent appeared in the doorway, his hat in his hands. In the morning light, she could see him more clearly than she had in the dim saloon. He was tall and lean, built like a man who spent his days in the saddle, and there was a quiet competence in the way he moved. He looked surprised to see her at the table but nodded approvingly. "Good, you are getting fed," he said. "We have got a long ride ahead, and I do not want you fainting on me." "I do not faint," Catherine said with more confidence than she felt. "Glad to hear it," Vincent replied. "The wagon is loaded and ready when you are." Catherine stood, smoothing down her dress, and followed Vincent through the house and out to the backyard where a sturdy wagon waited, hitched to two strong horses. The wagon bed was loaded with supplies, sacks of flour and beans, tools and lumber, a cast iron stove dismantled and tied down with rope. There was a small space left open near the front where blankets had been arranged into something like a nest. "That is for you," Vincent said, seeing her look. "Figured you would be more comfortable with some cushioning, given your condition." Catherine climbed up into the wagon with Vincent's help, his hand steady under her elbow, and settled herself among the blankets. It was surprisingly comfortable, and she felt some of the tension ease from her shoulders. Vincent swung up onto the driver's seat and took up the reins, clicking his tongue to get the horses moving. They rolled through Centralia's streets as the town was beginning to wake, smoke rising from chimneys, shopkeepers sweeping their porches. A few people waved to Vincent as they passed, and he tipped his hat in response. Catherine noticed that no one looked at her with judgment or scorn, which was a pleasant change from the stares she had grown accustomed to. Perhaps they simply assumed she was Vincent's wife, heading out to their new homestead together. Once they left the town behind, the landscape opened up into rolling hills covered with dense forest. Douglas fir and cedar trees towered overhead, their branches dripping with moisture from the night's rain. The road was rutted but passable, winding through the wilderness like a ribbon. The air smelled of wet earth and green growing things, and despite everything, Catherine felt a small spark of hope kindle in her chest. "Tell me about the land," she said after they had been traveling for an hour in comfortable silence. Vincent glanced back at her over his shoulder. "It is good land," he said. "I scouted it myself before I put in for the grant. There is a creek that runs year-round, plenty of timber for building, and a meadow that will make fine grazing for cattle. The soil is decent too, should grow vegetables well enough. Have you built anything yet?" "Just started a cabin," Vincent admitted. "Got the foundation laid and some of the walls up before I had to come into town for supplies. It will not be fancy, but it will be solid and weatherproof." "How did you end up with a land grant?" Catherine asked, curious despite herself. Vincent was quiet for a moment, and she thought perhaps he would not answer. Then he said, "I worked as a scout for the army for a few years, helping them map territory and negotiate with the tribes. The government pays its debts in land more often than money these days. I did my service and they gave me my choice of parcels." "You have family," Catherine ventured. "Not anymore," Vincent said, and there was a finality in his tone that discouraged further questions. What about you? The baby's father, where is he? Catherine's hand went instinctively to her belly. Dead, she said simply. Logging accident last October. A tree fell wrong and killed 3 men. My husband was one of them. I am sorry, Vincent said, and he sounded like he meant it. His name was Thomas, Catherine continued, surprising herself by wanting to talk about it. We had only been married a year. He was a good man, worked hard, had plans for us. And then he was just gone and I had nothing. No savings, no family, no way to pay the rent. I tried to find work, but no one wants to hire a pregnant woman. I sold everything I owned just to eat and keep a roof over my head, and when that ran out. She trailed off, shrugging. You know the rest. I had $1 left and a crazy idea that maybe I could win enough to get by a little longer. You have got courage, Vincent said. Not many people would have sat down at that table, especially not in your situation. It was not courage, Catherine said. It was desperation. I did not have anything left to lose. You had plenty to lose, Vincent countered. Your dignity, for one thing. The respect of those watching, for another. You could have begged or stolen, but you chose to gamble for what you needed. That takes a certain kind of strength. They fell silent again after that, but it was an easier silence now, the awkwardness between them starting to fade. The wagon rolled on through the forest, and Catherine watched the world pass by with drowsy eyes. The motion of the wagon and the warmth of the sun on her face were making her sleepy, and eventually she dozed off, lulled by the rhythmic creaking of the wheels and the steady clip-clop of the horses' hooves. She woke to the sensation of the wagon stopping and Vincent calling back to her. We are here. Catherine sat up, blinking away sleep, and looked around. They had emerged from the forest into a wide meadow that sloped gently down toward a sparkling creek. Trees bordered the meadow on all sides, creating a natural enclosure that felt both open and protected. And there, on a slight rise overlooking the creek, stood the beginnings of a cabin. Vincent had not been exaggerating when he said he had just started it. The foundation was solid stone, carefully laid, and the walls were perhaps 4 feet high, constructed of thick logs notched and fitted together with obvious skill. But there was no roof yet, no door or windows, just the skeleton of what would become a home. It is not much to look at right now, Vincent said, jumping down from the wagon and coming around to help Catherine climb out. But give me another few weeks and it will be livable. Catherine stood in the meadow, one hand shading her eyes from the sun, and looked around at the land that would be her home for the next year. It was beautiful in a wild, untamed way. The creek sang over smooth stones, and birds called from the surrounding trees. Wildflowers dotted the grass, white and yellow and purple. It felt like a place where a person could start over, could build something new. What do you need me to do? She asked, turning to Vincent. He looked surprised by the question. Right now, nothing. You have been traveling all morning and you need rest. I will set up the tent for you to sleep in until the cabin is done, and then I will get back to work on the walls. I can help, Catherine insisted. I am pregnant, not invalid. Vincent studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. All right. Once you are rested, you can start organizing the supplies and setting up a cooking area. We will need a fire pit and some kind of shelter for the food stores to keep them dry and away from animals. Can you handle that? I can handle that, Catherine confirmed. Over the next few days, they fell into a rhythm. Vincent worked on the cabin from dawn until dusk, his shirt off in the warm spring sun, sweat gleaming on his shoulders as he lifted and fitted the heavy logs into place. Catherine established their camp, digging a proper fire pit lined with stones from the creek, building a simple lean-to to store their supplies, and preparing meals 3 times a day. She proved to be a good cook, able to make even basic rations taste appealing with the wild herbs she found growing in the meadow. They spoke little during those first days. Both focused on their work, but Catherine found herself watching Vincent when she thought he would not notice. There was something compelling about the way he moved, the quiet confidence with which he approached each task. He never rushed, never grew frustrated when something did not fit right, just patiently adjusted and tried again until he got it perfect. On the fourth day, as Catherine was stirring a pot of stew over the fire, Vincent came and sat down nearby, accepting the bowl she handed him with a nod of thanks. They ate in silence for a while, and then Vincent said, "You are a hard worker. I appreciate that." "I am earning my keep," Catherine replied. "It is more than that," Vincent said. "You did not have to take to this life so quickly. Some women would have spent their time complaining about the rough conditions." Catherine smiled slightly. "I have lived rough before. My family were homesteaders when I was young. I know what it takes to build something from nothing." "What happened to them?" Vincent asked. "Your family, I mean." "Fever took my parents when I was 15, Catherine said. "My brother tried to keep the farm going, but it was too much for him alone. He sold it eventually and moved to Portland. I have not seen him in 5 years." "So you have been on your own a long time," Vincent observed. "More or less," Catherine agreed. "I worked as a seamstress in Olympia for a few years. That is where I met Thomas. We got married and moved to Centralia when he got the job at the lumber mill. And then—" She shrugged. "You know the rest." Vincent set down his empty bowl and looked at her directly. "I want you to know that you are safe here. I know our arrangement is unusual, and I know you do not have any reason to trust me yet. But I give you my word that I will treat you with respect and honor. You are under my protection now, for whatever that is worth." The words settled something in Catherine that she had not realized was unsettled. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That means more than you know." As the days turned into weeks, the cabin began to take real shape. Vincent finished the walls and started on the roof, carefully laying split cedar shakes in overlapping rows that would keep out even the heaviest rain. Catherine continued to improve their camp, planting a small vegetable garden near the creek, setting snares that sometimes caught rabbits for their dinner, and even doing some basic mending on Vincent's clothes, which had taken a beating from the hard work. Her belly grew rounder as the baby inside her grew stronger. She felt it moving constantly now, little kicks and tumbles that reminded her she was not alone, that she was responsible for this small life that would soon enter the world. It was both thrilling and terrifying, especially out here in the wilderness so far from doctors or midwives. One evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Catherine finally voiced the fear that had been gnawing at her. "What happens when the baby comes? You said I would have time to recover, but what about the birthing itself? I do not know how to do this alone." Vincent poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling up into the darkening sky. "There is a woman about 5 miles west of here, a widow named Mrs. Patterson. She has delivered half the babies in this county. I will ride out tomorrow and talk to her, let her know you are here and when you are due. She will come when the time comes." "Can we afford her?" Catherine asked. "I will work something out," Vincent said. "Maybe trade labor or meat or something else she needs. Do not worry about the money, Catherine. Just focus on staying healthy." It was the first time he had used her name, and something about hearing it from his lips made her chest feel tight. She had gotten used to being called Miss or Madam or sometimes nothing at all, just anonymous and invisible in her poverty and pregnancy. But when Vincent said her name, she felt seen, acknowledged as a real person with value. "Vincent," she said, testing his name on her tongue. "Thank you for all of this. I know I said it before, but I mean it. You did not have to be kind to me, but you are, and I will not forget it." He looked at her across the fire, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "You make it sound like I am doing you some great favor. Truth is, Catherine, you are doing me just as much good. This place would be lonely without someone to talk to at the end of the day. And your cooking is a hell of a lot better than anything I can manage on my own." They both laughed at that, and the laughter eased something between them, bridged some gap that had been there since that night in the saloon. From that evening on, they talked more easily, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes for the future, the small observations of daily life. Vincent told her about his years scouting, the landscapes he had seen, the people he had met, some friendly and some hostile. Catherine told him about her childhood on the homestead, the games she had played with her brother, the dreams she had once had of becoming a teacher. "Why did you not?" Vincent asked. "Become a teacher, I mean," Catherine shrugged. "Life happened. My parents died and I had to work instead of going to school, and then I met Thomas, and being a wife and mother seemed like enough. Maybe it still can be someday." "You could still teach," Vincent said thoughtfully. "Once the ranch is established, once we have neighbors, there will be children who need educating. You could start a school right here." The idea had never occurred to Catherine, but once Vincent said it, it took root in her mind. A school, here on this land, where she could shape young minds and pass on knowledge. It was a beautiful dream, and she tucked it away in her heart to examine later. By the time June arrived, the cabin was finished. It was not large, just 2 rooms. One main living area with a fireplace and the kitchen area where Catherine's stove now stood, and a smaller bedroom partitioned off with a wooden wall. But it was solid and well built, with real glass windows that Vincent had hauled all the way from Centralia, and a door that hung straight and closed tight. Catherine stood in the doorway on the day they moved in, looking around at the space that would be her home. Vincent had even built furniture, a table and chairs, a bed frame that would hold a proper mattress once they could afford one. For now, it was piled with blankets and furs, but it was still more comfortable than anything Catherine had slept on in months. "It is wonderful," she said, and tears pricked at her eyes. "I cannot believe you built all of this." "We built it," Vincent corrected gently. "You have done just as much work as I have, just in different ways. This is our home, Catherine, for as long as you want to be here." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Catherine looked at Vincent and saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. It was not pity or obligation or mere kindness. It was something warmer, something that she had not dared to let herself hope for. But before she could say anything, before she could even process what she was seeing, a sharp pain lanced through her belly, so intense that she gasped and doubled over, clutching at the doorframe for support. "Catherine." Vincent was at her side in an instant, his arm around her shoulders, supporting her weight. "What is wrong? Is it the baby?" "I think so," Catherine managed through gritted teeth. The pain was already fading, but it left her shaky and frightened. "But it is too early. I still have nearly 2 months left." Vincent's face was pale beneath his tan. "I am riding for Mrs. Patterson. Can you make it inside, lie down on the bed?" Catherine nodded, and Vincent half carried her into the cabin, settling her onto the bed with gentle hands. Then he was gone, and she could hear the pounding of hoofbeats as he galloped away. The pains came and went over the next few hours, sometimes close together, sometimes with long gaps between. Catherine lay on the bed and tried not to panic, tried to remember what little she knew about childbirth. It was too early, she knew that much, and babies that came too early often did not survive. But perhaps it was just false labor, those practice contractions she had heard about. Perhaps everything would be fine when Vincent returned with Mrs. Patterson. The sun was setting and Catherine was in the grip of another contraction, this one so strong that she cried out despite herself. Mrs. Patterson was a stout woman with capable hands and a no-nonsense manner. She took one look at Catherine and started issuing orders. "Boil water," she told Vincent. "Lots of it. And get me clean cloths, as many as you can find. Then make yourself scarce. This is women's work." Vincent looked like he wanted to argue, but one glare from Mrs. Patterson sent him scurrying to obey. Once he was busy with his tasks, Mrs. Patterson sat down on the edge of the bed and placed a cool hand on Catherine's forehead. "All right, girl," she said briskly. "Let me take a look and see what we are dealing with." The examination was uncomfortable but mercifully quick. When Mrs. Patterson straightened up, her expression was thoughtful. "You are in early labor, no doubt about that. Baby is coming whether we like it or not. But you are not as far along as I would like, which means this might take a while. Have you felt the baby moving today?" "Yes," Catherine said. "This morning, quite a lot." "Good. That is good. Now, here is what is going to happen. You are going to do exactly what I tell you when I tell you. This is not your first child being born early, and it will not be the last. Some make it, some do not. But we are going to do everything we can to give this little one the best chance." Catherine nodded, too frightened to speak. The contractions were coming more regularly now, each one building like a wave and crashing over her. Mrs. Patterson talked her through each one, telling her when to breathe and when to push and when to rest. Vincent stayed outside, pacing by the fire, occasionally bringing whatever Mrs. Patterson called for through the door. The night stretched on endlessly. Catherine lost track of time, lost in the rhythm of pain and effort. Mrs. Patterson's voice became her anchor, steady and sure, guiding her through. And finally, as the first gray light of dawn began to show through the windows, Catherine felt something shift, felt the baby moving down, and with one final tremendous effort, she pushed her child into the world. The baby's cry was thin and weak, not the robust wail Catherine had hoped for, but it was a cry nonetheless. Mrs. Patterson worked quickly, clearing the infant's mouth and nose, wrapping the tiny body in a warm cloth. "It is a boy," she announced. "Small but breathing. That is what matters." Catherine held out her arms, and Mrs. Patterson placed the baby gently in them. He was so tiny, so fragile, with translucent skin and eyes that seemed too large for his face. But he was alive and he was hers, and Catherine felt a surge of fierce protective love unlike anything she had ever experienced. "He is beautiful," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "He is a fighter," Mrs. Patterson corrected. "Born too early but fighting for every breath. You are going to need to keep him warm and feed him often. He might not make it through the week, Catherine. I need you to understand that. Early babies are delicate." "He will make it," Catherine said with absolute certainty. "He did not survive all of this just to give up now." Mrs. Patterson smiled, a real smile that softened her stern features. "That is the spirit. Now let me clean you up and then I will show that man outside that he has got a son." Vincent came in a few minutes later, his hat in his hands, his eyes wide with something like fear. He stopped just inside the doorway, looking at Catherine and the baby with an expression she could not quite read. "Come see him," Catherine said softly. "Come meet my son." Vincent approached slowly, as if afraid to disturb them. He knelt beside the bed and looked down at the tiny infant in Catherine's arms. His hand, so large and rough, reached out tentatively to touch the baby's downy head with one finger. "He is so small," Vincent said, his voice wondering. "But strong," Catherine said. "Mrs. Patterson says he is a fighter." Vincent looked up at her then, and Catherine saw tears shining in his eyes. "You are a fighter too," he said. "Both of you. I have never seen anyone so brave." Something passed between them in that moment, something unspoken but profound. Catherine felt it settle in her heart, warm and certain. This man who had won her in a card game, who had brought her to this wild place and built her a home, who had ridden through the night to fetch help when she needed it. This man was becoming more than just her employer or her benefactor. He was becoming something else entirely, something she was almost afraid to name. Mrs. Patterson stayed for 3 days, teaching Catherine how to care for the premature infant, how to keep him warm and fed and clean. The baby, whom Catherine named Christopher after her father, slowly grew stronger. His cries became louder, his grip more firm, and his eyes began to focus on the faces around him. By the time Mrs. Patterson declared him out of immediate danger and prepared to leave, Catherine felt cautiously optimistic about his chances. "You have done well, Mrs. Patterson told her on the morning of her departure. "That boy has got his mother's stubbornness, which will serve him well in this life, and he has got something else too, something I did not expect to see." "What is that?" Catherine asked. Mrs. Patterson glanced toward the door, where Vincent was loading supplies onto her wagon. "He has got a father who loves him, even if that father is not related by blood. I have seen the way that man looks at you both. Mark my words, Catherine, if you do not marry him within the year, you are a fool." Catherine felt her cheeks flush. "It is not like that between us. I work for him, that is all." "Is it?" Mrs. Patterson said skeptically. "Well, perhaps you should think about whether that is all you want it to be. A woman in your position could do a lot worse than a man like Vincent Graham. And I suspect you could do a lot worse than this land and this life too." After Mrs. Patterson left, Catherine found herself thinking about her words constantly. She watched Vincent as he worked, as he came in each evening and washed up at the basin, as he sat across the table from her at mealtimes, as he bent over Christopher's cradle to check on the sleeping baby with a tenderness that made her throat tight. Had she been blind not to see what was happening? Or had she simply been too afraid to acknowledge it? The truth was that Catherine had not allowed herself to think about love or romance or any of that since Thomas died. The grief had been too raw, the struggle to survive too consuming. But now, with a roof over her head and food in her belly and her baby safe in his cradle, she had room to feel again. And what she felt when she looked at Vincent was complicated and powerful and more than a little frightening. Summer deepened around them, and the ranch began to truly take shape. Vincent brought in a dozen head of cattle, paying for them with money from his land grant and the little bit he had won in the card game. He built a corral and a small barn, and he began the hard work of clearing more land for grazing. Catherine tended her garden, which was producing abundantly, and took care of Christopher, who continued to grow stronger day by day. They worked as a team, anticipating each other's needs, moving around each other in the small cabin with easy familiarity. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the distance between them began to shrink. Vincent started sitting closer to her at meals. Catherine found excuses to touch his arm or his shoulder when she passed by. They lingered over their evening conversations by the fire, neither wanting to be the first to say goodnight. One evening in late July, as the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and gold, Vincent came in from his work and found Catherine sitting in the rocking chair he had built for her, nursing Christopher while singing a lullaby. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, just watching, and when Catherine looked up and saw his face, she knew. "Vincent," she said softly, "we need to talk." He came in and sat down at the table, his hands folded in front of him. "All right," he said. "I am listening." Catherine took a deep breath. "What are we doing here? This arrangement we have, this employer and employee thing, it does not feel true anymore. At least not to me. Does it feel true to you?" Vincent was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "No. It has not felt true for weeks now, maybe longer." Catherine, I have to tell you something, and I need you to hear me out before you say anything. All right, Catherine said, her heart pounding. I did not plan this, Vincent began. When I made that bet in the saloon, I was just trying to help you. I saw a woman in a bad situation, and I had the means to offer her a way out. That is all it was supposed to be. But then I got to know you, and I saw how strong you are, how hard you work, how much you love your son. And somewhere along the way, I started to fall for you. Not just admiring you or respecting you, but really falling for you in a way I did not think I was capable of anymore. He looked down at his hands, as if afraid to meet her eyes. I know the timing is terrible. I know you are still mourning your husband, and I know you have got a newborn to think about. I am not asking you for anything, Catherine. I just needed you to know the truth. Because living here with you, pretending I do not feel this way, it is killing me. Catherine's eyes filled with tears, but they were not sad tears. Vincent, look at me. He raised his head, and she saw the vulnerability in his face, the fear of rejection. I have been falling for you too, she said. I did not want to admit it, even to myself, because it felt like a betrayal of Thomas's memory. But the truth is that Thomas would want me to be happy. He would want me to live and to love again. And I think I could love you, Vincent Graham. I think maybe I already do. The joy that flooded Vincent's face was like sunrise breaking over mountains. He stood up and crossed to her, kneeling beside the rocking chair so they were at eye level. Are you sure? He asked. I do not want you to feel obligated or grateful or anything like that. I want you to want this because you truly want it. I want it, Catherine said firmly. I want you. I want this life we are building together. But I need time, Vincent. I am not ready to marry again, not yet. I need to finish grieving Thomas properly, and I need to find my own footing in this new world. Can you give me that time? I can give you all the time you need, Vincent promised. I am not going anywhere, Catherine. I am in this for as long as you will have me. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, and kissed her gently on the forehead. It was not a passionate kiss, not a claim of ownership, just a tender gesture of affection and promise. Catherine closed her eyes and let herself feel it, let herself accept that this was real and good and right. The rest of the summer passed in a haze of happiness. Vincent and Catherine did not rush into anything physical beyond occasional hand-holding and chaste kisses, both content to let their relationship develop naturally. They talked endlessly about everything and nothing, learning each other's quirks and preferences, building a foundation of friendship that would support whatever came next. Christopher thrived, growing chubby and active, and he clearly adored Vincent, gurgling and reaching for him whenever Vincent came near. In August, Vincent rode into Centralia to register his cattle brand and pick up supplies. While he was there, he stopped at the land office and filed paperwork to add Catherine's name to the deed for the 40 acres. When he came home and told her what he had done, Catherine was stunned. "Why would you do that?" she asked. "The land is yours. You want it fair and square." "I told you that night in the saloon that if you worked for me for a year, you would be free to go or stay as you saw fit," Vincent reminded her. "But the truth is, Catherine, you are not just working for me. You are building this place with me. You have put as much sweat and effort into this ranch as I have, and you deserve to own it too. Whether we end up together or not, this land is as much yours as it is mine." Catherine threw her arms around him, overwhelmed by the gesture. "I love you," she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I know I said I needed time, but I cannot keep pretending I do not feel this. I love you, Vincent." He held her tight, his face buried in her hair. "I love you too," he said. "God, Catherine, I love you so much." That night, for the first time, Vincent did not sleep on his bedroll by the fire. Catherine invited him to share the bed with her, and though they did nothing more than hold each other and talk quietly until they fell asleep, it felt monumental. They were a couple now, truly and completely, and the future stretched out before them full of possibility. September brought the first hints of autumn, the nights growing cooler and the leaves on the deciduous trees beginning to turn gold and red. Vincent and Catherine discussed their plans for the coming winter, stockpiling firewood and preserving food from the garden. They also talked about the future beyond winter, about expanding the herd, about building a proper barn, about maybe even starting that school Catherine had dreamed of. One crisp morning in early October, almost exactly a year since Thomas had died, Vincent woke Catherine with coffee and breakfast in bed, a rare indulgence. Christopher was still asleep in his cradle, and sunlight was streaming through the windows, painting everything in warm, golden light. "What is this about?" Catherine asked, sitting up and accepting the cup of coffee with a smile. Vincent sat down on the edge of the bed, looking nervous in a way she had rarely seen. "I have been thinking," he said, "about us, about our future, about what we want from this life." "And what have you concluded?" Catherine asked, her heart beginning to race. Vincent reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped it carefully to reveal a ring, simple but beautiful, a silver band with a small blue stone set in it. "I know I said I would give you time, and I meant it. If you are not ready, I will ask again in 6 months or a year or however long it takes. But Catherine, I want to marry you. I want to be Christopher's father in every way that matters. I want to build this life with you not as partners in business but as partners in everything. Will you marry me?" Catherine looked at the ring, then at Vincent's hopeful face, then at the cradle where Christopher slept peacefully, then out the window at the land they had built together. This was her home, this wild place in the wilderness. These were her people, this man who had won her in a card game and this child she had brought into the world against all odds. This was her life, and it was beautiful. "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, Vincent, I will marry you." He slid the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly as if it had been made for her. Then he kissed her, a real kiss this time, deep and passionate and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Catherine laughed with pure joy. "How did you get the ring?" she asked. "When did you even have time?" "I have been carrying it for 2 months," Vincent admitted. "I bought it in Centralia back in August, the same day I put your name on the deed. I have just been waiting for the right moment to ask." "This is the perfect moment," Catherine assured him. "Everything is perfect." They decided to keep the wedding simple, just a trip into Centralia to have the minister perform the ceremony, with Mrs. Patterson and the boarding house keeper as witnesses. The ceremony took place on a Saturday in late October, almost exactly a year after Catherine had lost Thomas and ended up alone and pregnant in the world. She wore a new dress that she had sewn herself from fabric Vincent had bought her, simple blue calico but clean and pretty. Vincent wore his best shirt and pants, his hair neatly combed, and he held Christopher in his arms throughout the ceremony, already every inch the devoted father. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Vincent kissed Catherine like he was sealing a vow that went deeper than words. They celebrated with a meal at the boarding house, and the keeper made a cake that was almost too pretty to eat. Then they climbed back into their wagon and rode home to their ranch, to the cabin Vincent had built and the land they now owned together. That night, after Christopher was asleep, Vincent and Catherine consummated their marriage with a tenderness and passion that left them both breathless and amazed. It was different from what Catherine had known with Thomas, not better or worse but simply different, shaped by who they were and what they had been through to get to this moment. Afterwards, Lying tangled together in the bed, Catherine felt a sense of peace and completion she had not thought she would ever feel again. "Are you happy?" Vincent asked, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her bare shoulder. "Happier than I have any right to be," Catherine admitted. "A year ago I was alone and desperate and convinced my life was over, and now I have everything I could ever want. It feels almost too good to be true." "It is true," Vincent assured her, "and it is only going to get better. We are going to build something amazing here, Catherine. I can feel it." He was right. Over the winter, they worked on improving the cabin, adding a second bedroom for Christopher and building proper storage for their growing supply of food and tools. When spring came, they expanded the garden and brought in more cattle. Vincent hired a hand to help with the heavy work, a young man named David who was grateful for the opportunity to learn ranching. In May, Catherine discovered she was pregnant again. The news filled her with a complex mix of emotions, joy at the prospect of another child but also fear, remembering how difficult Christopher's premature birth had been. But Vincent was steadfast in his support, and Mrs. Patterson came to check on her regularly throughout the pregnancy. This baby went full term, and when Catherine went into labor on a cold morning in January of 1885, the birth was quick and relatively easy compared to her first. They had a daughter this time, a robust baby with Vincent's dark hair and Catherine's blue eyes. They named her Sarah, after Vincent's mother, and Christopher was fascinated by his new little sister, constantly wanting to touch her tiny fingers and toes. Life on the ranch settled into a comfortable rhythm. The herd grew, and with it their prosperity. Vincent proved to be a natural rancher, with an instinct for breeding and grazing patterns that kept the cattle healthy and productive. Catherine managed the household and continued to work on her dream of starting a school. As more families moved into the area, drawn by the good land and the promise of the railroad, there were indeed children who needed educating. By the time Christopher was 5 and Sarah was 2, Catherine had established a small schoolhouse on their property, built by Vincent with the help of neighbors who were eager to have a place for their children to learn. Catherine taught reading and writing and arithmetic, and she loved every minute of it. She had found her calling, the purpose she had been seeking since she was a young girl herself. Vincent often came to watch her teach, standing in the back of the schoolhouse with his hat in his hands, a proud smile on his face. Afterwards, he would walk her and their children home, and they would talk about the lessons and the students and the future. Their love had deepened over the years, moving beyond the initial passion into something more solid and enduring, a partnership built on mutual respect and shared dreams. In the spring of 1887, Catherine gave birth to another son, whom they named Michael. And 2 years after that, another daughter arrived, whom they named Elizabeth. Each child was welcomed with joy and celebration, and each one added another layer of richness to their family life. Christopher grew into a responsible and hardworking boy who adored his younger siblings and showed a real aptitude for ranching. Sarah was bright and curious, always asking questions and wanting to understand how things worked. The ranch prospered beyond their wildest dreams. The 40 acres that Vincent had won in the land grant expanded as they purchased adjacent parcels from neighbors who moved on, or from the territorial government. By 1890, they owned 120 acres, with a herd of 50 cattle and a dozen horses. The original cabin had been expanded multiple times and now stood as the heart of a proper homestead, with a big barn, a smokehouse, a chicken coop, and the schoolhouse that had become a fixture of the community. One evening in the autumn of 1890, 7 years after that fateful card game in Centralia, Vincent and Catherine sat on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the land they had built together. The children were inside, supposedly doing their homework, but more likely playing some game or another. From inside came the sound of laughter and Christopher's voice telling his siblings a story. "You ever think about that night in the saloon?" Catherine asked, leaning against Vincent's shoulder. "Sometimes," Vincent admitted. "It feels like a lifetime ago now, like it happened to different people." "In a way it did," Catherine said. "I was so lost back then, so desperate, I did not even know who I was anymore." "And you were just a cowboy with a land grant and a dream." "And now," Vincent prompted. "Now we are exactly who we are supposed to be," Catherine said. "We are ranchers and parents and partners. We have built this life from nothing, from $1 and a hand of cards and a crazy leap of faith. And it is the best thing I have ever been part of." Vincent turned to kiss her, a soft, lingering kiss that still made her heart flutter even after 7 years of marriage. "I love you, Catherine Graham. I loved you from the moment you sat down at that poker table with your last dollar and your chin held high. And I am going to love you for the rest of my days." "And I love you," Catherine replied. "You gave me everything when I had nothing. You gave me a home and a family and a purpose. You gave me hope when I had forgotten what that felt like." They sat in comfortable silence after that, watching the stars come out one by one in the darkening sky. Inside, the children's laughter rang out again, and Catherine smiled. This was her life now, these people and this place and this love that had grown from the most unlikely of beginnings. She thought about that desperate woman who had walked into a saloon with her last dollar, pregnant and alone and terrified of the future. If she could go back and tell that woman what waited for her, what happiness and fulfillment and love lay just on the other side of that card game, would she believe it? Probably not, Catherine decided. Some things are too good to believe until you live them yourself. The years continued to roll by, each one bringing its own challenges and triumphs. There were hard winters when they lost cattle to cold and sickness, and dry summers when the creek ran low and they had to haul water for the stock. There were years when prices for beef were low and money was tight, and years when everything seemed to go right, and they could finally afford little luxuries like new dresses for the girls or books for the school. Through it all, Vincent and Catherine faced everything together, their bond growing stronger with each passing season. They made it a tradition to return to Centralia once a year, always visiting the Silver Spur Saloon where their story had begun. Silas still ran the poker games, a little grayer but still sharp as ever, and he always greeted them warmly, reminiscing about that night when a pregnant woman had put up her last dollar and walked away with a cowboy and 40 acres. "Best hand I ever dealt," he would say, shaking his head in wonder. "Changed both your lives." "Best hand I ever lost," Catherine would reply with a smile. As the children grew older, Catherine and Vincent told them the story of how they met, though they left out some of the darker details, focusing instead on the theme of courage and taking chances and believing in possibilities. The children loved the story, especially the part about their father winning their mother in a card game, which seemed incredibly romantic to their young minds. Christopher grew into a fine young man who took over more and more of the ranching duties, as Vincent's back started to complain about the hard work. At 19, Christopher married a girl from a neighboring ranch, and they built a house on the far edge of the property, staying close but establishing their own family. Sarah, who had inherited her mother's love of learning, went to Portland to attend the normal school and came back as a certified teacher, taking over the schoolhouse so Catherine could have more time for other pursuits. Michael, their second son, had a gift with horses that surpassed even Vincent's skill. He started a breeding program that produced some of the finest saddle horses in the territory, and his reputation spread far and wide. Elizabeth, the baby of the family, was artistic and dreamy, always sketching or painting the beautiful landscapes around them. She eventually moved to Seattle to study art, though she came home often to visit. Through all these changes, Vincent and Catherine remained the steady center. Their love the foundation on which their family was built. They were in their 40s now, not old but no longer young either, and they had the satisfaction of seeing their children grown and thriving, of knowing that the legacy they were building would continue long after they were gone. One spring evening in 1900, 17 years after that card game, Catherine and Vincent took a walk down to the creek where they often went to talk and be alone together. The creek was running high with snowmelt from the mountains, and the sound of rushing water filled the air. They sat on their favorite rock, the one where Vincent had first told Catherine he loved her, and looked out at the land that had become so dear to them. "We have had a good life," Catherine said, taking Vincent's hand in hers. "The best," Vincent agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." "Do you have any regrets?" Catherine asked. "Anything you wish had been different?" Vincent thought about it for a long moment. "Not about you or the children or the ranch. Those are all perfect. Maybe I wish I had told you I loved you sooner, saved us both some heartache. But even that led to where we are now, so I suppose I cannot truly regret it." "I do not have any regrets either," Catherine said. "Not even the hard parts, because they made the good parts sweeter. I am grateful for every moment, Vincent, every single one." He put his arm around her, and they sat together as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold and purple. The sounds of their ranch drifted to them on the evening breeze, the lowing of cattle, the whinny of horses, the distant voices of Christopher and his wife calling their children in for supper. It was the sound of life continuing, of the future unfolding just as it should. Catherine leaned her head on Vincent's shoulder and closed her eyes, perfectly content. She thought about that desperate woman who had walked into a saloon with her last dollar, not knowing that she was about to bet on the best thing that would ever happen to her. She had gone all in on a hand of cards and won so much more than money or land. She had won love and family and a home and a purpose. She had won everything that mattered. "Thank you," she whispered to Vincent. "For what?" he asked, his breath warm against her hair. "For seeing me," Catherine said. "For seeing past the desperate pregnant woman to the person I could be. For giving me a chance when no one else would. For loving me." "Thank you for taking that chance," Vincent replied. "For sitting down at that table and betting everything on a future you could not see. For working beside me to build this life. For loving me back. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Catherine Graham." They sat by the creek until the stars came out, talking and laughing and remembering all the moments that had brought them to this perfect evening. And when they finally walked back to the house, hand in hand, they carried with them the knowledge that they had built something truly special, something that would last long after they were gone. The ranch continued to thrive under their stewardship, and eventually under Christopher's, when Vincent decided he was ready to fully retire. Catherine continued teaching until she was in her 60s, shaping the minds of 2 generations of children in their community. And through it all, she and Vincent remained devoted to each other, their love story the stuff of local legend. When people asked Catherine about the secret to a happy marriage, she always said the same thing. "We started with nothing but $1 and a dream and a willingness to work hard. Everything we built together, and that made it mean something. We were partners in the truest sense, equal in all things, and we never forgot to be grateful for the gift we had been given." Vincent, for his part, would just smile and say, "I won the best hand of my life that night in the Silver Spur. 3 queens could not beat my 4 tens, But what I really won was a queen who was worth more than all the money in the world. As the years advanced into their later life, Vincent and Catherine found joy in their grandchildren, who ran wild across the ranch just as their parents had done before them. Christopher and his wife had 4 children. Sarah had 3, Michael had 2, and even Elizabeth, who had settled in Seattle, brought her one daughter home for long visits every summer. The house was always full of noise and laughter and love, exactly as Catherine had dreamed it would be. On their 25th wedding anniversary in October of 1908, the entire family gathered for a celebration. The children had decorated the house with fall flowers and ribbons, and the grandchildren had made cards and drawings expressing their love for their grandparents. There was a feast that lasted for hours, with everyone contributing their favorite dishes, and afterwards there was music and dancing in the barn, which had been cleared out and decorated for the occasion. Catherine, now 47 years old and still beautiful in Vincent's eyes, danced with her husband while their children and grandchildren looked on with affection. She wore a new dress that Sarah had helped her sew, deep blue like the stone in her wedding ring, and Vincent wore his best suit, the one he saved for special occasions. 25 years, Catherine said as they swayed to the music. Who would have thought we would make it this far? I always knew, Vincent said confidently. From that first night I knew you were special. I knew we could build something that would last. You were more confident than I was, Catherine admitted. I was terrified for months, convinced that it was all going to fall apart somehow. But you were patient with me, and you proved to me day by day that I could trust you, that we could trust each other. Trust is everything, Vincent agreed. Without that, nothing else works, but with it, anything is possible. They danced until Catherine's feet hurt and Vincent's back was aching. And then they sat down with their family and listened to Christopher give a speech about how much his parents meant to him, to all of them. There were tears and laughter and more toasts than anyone could count. And by the end of the evening, Catherine felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the abundance of her life. That night, lying in bed with Vincent's arm around her, Catherine reflected on the journey that had brought them here. 25 years ago, she had been a desperate widow with nothing to her name but a baby in her belly and $1 silver. Today, she was a woman of property and influence, a respected teacher, a beloved wife and mother and grandmother. The transformation was so complete that sometimes she could hardly believe it was real. "What are you thinking about?" Vincent asked sleepily. "Just how lucky I am," Catherine said. "How lucky we both are." "Luck had nothing to do with it," Vincent said. "We worked for this, Catherine. We earned every bit of it through sweat and sacrifice and dedication. Do not sell us short by calling it luck." "Maybe you are right," Catherine conceded. "Maybe it was not luck but choice. We chose to build something together, and we chose to keep building even when it was hard. And now we get to enjoy the fruits of all that choosing." "Exactly," Vincent said, pulling her closer. "And I would choose you again every time in every possible version of our lives. You are my partner, my love, my best friend. You are everything to me." Catherine turned to kiss him, a kiss that held 25 years of love and trust and partnership. "And you are everything to me," she whispered against his lips. "My cowboy, won in a card game and kept forever in my heart." They made love that night with the tenderness of long familiarity, knowing exactly how to please each other, and afterwards they fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, content and fulfilled and deeply, profoundly happy. The years rolled on, bringing more changes and challenges. The world was modernizing rapidly, with automobiles beginning to replace horses and electricity starting to reach even remote areas. The ranch adapted to these changes, always staying ahead of the curve thanks to Michael's forward-thinking approach to breeding and Christopher's willingness to invest in new technology. Vincent's health began to decline as he entered his 60s. Nothing dramatic, just the slow wearing down that comes with a lifetime of hard physical labor. His joints ached more, and he tired more easily, but his mind remained sharp, and his love for Catherine never wavered. Catherine herself remained remarkably healthy, her daily walks and the active life she had led keeping her strong and mobile. They spent more time together now that both were retired from their daily work, taking long walks around the property, visiting with their children and grandchildren, and simply enjoying each other's company. They had reached that rare and precious stage of life where there was nothing left to prove, nothing left to strive for, only the appreciation of what they had built and the love they shared. One summer evening in 1915, 32 years after that card game, Vincent and Catherine sat on their porch watching the sunset, just as they had done thousands of times before. But this time felt different somehow, more weighted with meaning. Vincent was 73 years old now, and Catherine was 54, and they both knew that their time together was finite, that every sunset was precious. "If I go first," Vincent said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence, "I want you to know that you made my life worth living. Before you, I was just drifting, going through the motions. But you gave me purpose and meaning and joy. You gave me a reason to get up every morning and work hard and plan for the future. You gave me everything, Catherine." "Do not talk like that," Catherine said, her voice catching. "You are not going anywhere. We still have years ahead of us." "Maybe," Vincent allowed. "But I need you to know this just in case. You are the love of my life, Catherine Graham. You are my heart and my soul and my everything. And if I am not here to tell you that tomorrow, I need you to remember I said it today." Catherine wiped away tears. "You are my everything too," she said. "I would not have survived without you, Vincent. You saved me in every way a person can be saved. And then you stood beside me while I found the strength to save myself. That is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." They held each other as the sun disappeared below the horizon, and the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. It was a perfect moment, one of thousands they had shared over the decades, and Catherine held it close to her heart, treasuring it like the precious gift it was. Vincent lived for another 5 years, dying peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78 in the winter of 1920. Catherine was beside him when he passed, holding his hand and telling him how much she loved him. The grief was overwhelming, a physical pain that made it hard to breathe, but underneath, it was a profound gratitude for the 37 years they had shared together. At Vincent's funeral, attended by family and friends and neighbors from miles around, Catherine stood tall and spoke about the man she had loved. She told the story of how they met, of the card game and the 40 acres and the slow building of trust and love. She talked about Vincent's kindness and integrity, his hard work and dedication, his love for his family and his land. And she ended by saying that he had been the best man she had ever known, and she was honored to have been his wife. After Vincent died, Catherine continued to live on the ranch, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and even great-grandchildren now. She remained active and engaged, still teaching occasionally when the regular teacher needed help, still working in her garden, still taking her daily walks along the creek where she and Vincent had spent so many happy hours. People sometimes asked her if she was lonely without Vincent, and she always said the same thing. "I miss him every day, but I am not lonely. He is still with me in everything I see and do. This land we built together, this family we raised, these memories we made, they all carry his presence. He may be gone from this earth, but he will never be gone from my heart." Catherine lived to the remarkable age of 92, dying peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1956, 73 years after that fateful card game in the Silver Spur Saloon. She had lived to see the ranch pass from Christopher to his oldest son, to see the schoolhouse grow into a proper school district with multiple buildings and dozens of teachers, to see automobiles and airplanes and television become commonplace. She had lived through 2 world wars and a depression, through unimaginable changes in the world around her. But through it all, she had held onto the values that she and Vincent had built their life on: hard work, honesty, dedication, and above all, love. At her funeral, held in the same church where she and Vincent had married all those years ago, the minister spoke about Catherine's remarkable life. He talked about the courage it took for a desperate pregnant woman to sit down at a poker table with her last dollar, about the strength it took to build a life from nothing, about the love that had sustained her through 73 years of joy and sorrow and everything in between. Catherine's oldest grandson, Christopher's son, also spoke. He told stories about his grandmother's kindness and wisdom, about the way she always had time to listen to the problems of a child or grandchild or great-grandchild, about the love she had for learning and teaching and helping others discover their potential. And he ended by reading from Catherine's journal, which she had kept faithfully for decades. The entry he read was from October of 1908, written on Catherine and Vincent's 25th wedding anniversary. It said simply, "Today we celebrated 25 years of marriage, 25 years of building a life together from nothing but hope and hard work and love. When I think back to that terrified pregnant woman who walked into a saloon with her last dollar, I barely recognize her. That woman thought her life was over, that she had nothing left to lose. But she was wrong. She had everything to gain, she just did not know it yet. She was about to bet her last dollar and win a cowboy and 40 acres and a love that would sustain her for a lifetime. She was about to start the greatest adventure of her life. And I am so grateful that she had the courage to sit down at that table and play that hand, because everything I have, everything I am, everything I love, it all started with that one moment of desperate bravery. Thank you, Vincent, for seeing her, for saving her, for loving her. Thank you for giving me the life I always dreamed of but never thought I would have. Thank you for being my partner, my love, my heart. I am the luckiest woman in the world, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." There was not a dry eye in the church when the reading ended. Catherine's family, dozens of descendants spread across 3 generations, all understood that they owed their existence to that moment in the saloon, to Catherine's courage and Vincent's kindness and the love that had grown between them. They were all living proof that sometimes the biggest gambles pay off in ways beyond imagination. That sometimes putting everything on the line is exactly what needs to happen for miracles to unfold. After the funeral, the family gathered at the ranch for a meal and to share memories of Catherine. They walked the land that she and Vincent had claimed and cleared and cultivated, land that now supported a thriving cattle operation and still held the original cabin, preserved as a historical landmark. They visited the creek where Catherine and Vincent had courted, where generations of children had played and learned to fish. They stood in the schoolhouse that Catherine had founded, which was now a museum showcasing the history of education in the region. And as the sun set over the ranch that evening, casting golden light across the meadows and forests, Catherine's family raised their glasses in a toast. To Catherine and Vincent, to the love story that had started with a card game and lasted for over 7 decades, to the legacy they had built that would endure for generations to come. It was a fitting tribute to two people who had taken nothing and turned it into everything, who had proven that love and hard work and courage can overcome any obstacle, that the best things in life are worth fighting for, worth betting everything on, worth believing in even when all evidence suggests otherwise. The ranch still stands today, passed down through the generations, a testament to what two people can build when they commit to each other and to a shared vision. Visitors can tour the original cabin and see the poker table that was donated to the Ranch Museum by the owners of the Silver Spur Saloon after it closed. They can read Catherine's journals and see Vincent's tools, and walk the land that was won with a hand of cards and transformed through decades of love and labor. And if you visit on a quiet evening when the sun is setting and the shadows are long, some say you can still feel their presence there. Catherine and Vincent walking hand in hand along the creek, forever young, forever in love, forever grateful for the chance encounter that changed both their lives. It is a story that reminds us that sometimes the greatest treasures come from the most unlikely places, that courage and kindness can change the world, and that love, real lasting love, is always worth betting on. The final words in Catherine's journal, written just days before her death at age 92, sum up her extraordinary life. I put up my last dollar in a card game and won a cowboy and 40 acres. But what I really won was hope and home and family and love. I won a reason to live and a legacy to leave behind. I won everything that matters in this world and the next, and if I had to do it all over again, I would not change a single thing. Well, maybe I would tell Vincent I loved him a few days sooner, but otherwise, everything was perfect. Thank you, God, for that card game. Thank you for Vincent. Thank you for this beautiful life. I am ready now to see my cowboy again, to dance with him one more time, to hold his hand and walk into whatever comes next together, just as we have done for all these years. Wait for me, my love. I am coming home.